the end of the day, if we don't have some sort of accountability, you're screwed.
The hardest part is figuring out what you want to master.
Focus on your product.
Can you tell somebody that they suck?
You got to just go for this is exactly what I want to do for a living.
You can't even tell somebody that their breath is their life.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Short Story Long. We have a very special guest today. His name is Jason Treu. Jason, thanks for coming in.
Hey, thanks for having the show today.
Of course.
Fun to fly out here today. And
did you fly out here just for this?
I had some other things, but
we'll say just for this.
Just for this.
I
just
feel
for
special.
you.
Yes.
You are so special.
Yes. I'm really excited because you are an executive coach. And I mean, we'll get into all of it, but I'm really interested in what you do. And I think that for me, I'm 31 years old. I've had a business for close to 10 years now. And I had always obviously heard about coaching and life coaching and executive coaching, all this different stuff. And I will say that for a long time, I mean, born and raised in Ohio, didn't go to college, and maybe my brain was a little turned off to these sort of things. But I always thought it was just, I don't know, not for me, or didn't really understand what it even was and whatever. And it wasn't until I actually did an interview with somebody who now is a really good friend of mine named Kevion, who does a lot of life coaching type stuff. And after his podcast, he said, hey man, that was so cool. And there were so many people that listened to that. Let me give you a couple sessions for free. And I said, all right, I'll do it. I'll answer whatever questions you ask me. I'll listen to your advice. And it really, I mean, even just his perspective and his sort of outside knowledge on my life and what I'm doing right and wrong was really, really useful.
What did you learn?
You want to know what I learned is I learned some basic things that I was doing, like a lack of proper goal setting was the main thing, and a lack of holding myself properly accountable. Now, don't get me wrong. He went over like everything from affirmations to just the mentality of be, do, have, and all these deeper things, right? But really what I took away from it was like, man, you're working really hard. You're a relatively intelligent guy, but like, what's your goal? What's your goal for the end of 2018? And are you waking up every single day and trying to fight towards that goal? Or are you doing 10 other things that are just presenting themselves that day, and then you're waking up 6 months later and wondering why you're not happier or closer to where you thought you were going to be? So it was really just clarifying that, carving that out, and then being accountable to another adult that I respected really changed my viewpoint. And it got me, I mean, I hate to say it, it got me waking up earlier. It got me working out with a trainer. It got me all those things because it was just the clarity to kind of take a step back for a second and say, what are you really doing? It's that awareness, So all that big intro is to say, now I'm super excited about people like you and what you do. And so I'm really excited to have you on, not only learn your story, but then to like get and give some advice and insight. And, I just think people like you can help a lot of people, especially young people like my audience. And I don't know that everyone is as open to it as they should be.
Yes, because end of the day, your blind spots and the patterns you've been doing as a little kid are the things that are holding you back the most. And when you can start identifying those, you can take exponential leaps forward. And if not, at some point, you hit a ceiling and a plateau and can't go any further. Mm-hmm. And then what happens, you also crater your own life too. Mm-hmm. Because at some point, being a bull in a china shop works to get a business so far, but then it stops, right?
It's
because
so
it's a people management, and it's building a culture of, psychological safety with people. It's building transparency. It's caring. I mean, there's a lot of things that go in to doing it. And end of the day, you're a successful person is a glorified people manager, not only professionally, but personally.
So true.
And you'll get the most out of people if you spend the time doing it.
Yep.
Because it's kind of like the old adage, right? It's like you can fish for someone else, but if you teach them to fish, and you can teach a whole business how to do that, people, you can operate at 10, 15, 20 times where you're currently at and outflank the competition.
It's so true. And what blew my mind as my business started becoming successful, what blew my mind was the amount of time that I was spending managing personalities and feeling like a therapist and solving issues between people that didn't like each other, or you know what I'm saying, or people that felt unsafe.
And we'll figure that out because I think it's way easier than people think. You just have to set up the dynamic differently. Like, Brene Brown, and I've sent you that book,
Yes.
Braving the Wilderness. One of her things in the book is it's hard to hate people up close, right? And when you get to know people at a deeper level, you may not become best friends with them. You may not even become friends with them, but you'll like them and respect them at some level.
Yeah.
And in a working environment, you'll get along with them much better because you have that deeper level, right?
Yeah.
The problem in most working environments is you have people who dislike or hate each other. You have people who are neutral, then you have people who like and love. Well, it depends on the mix of people in that group because it can crater it, right?
Yeah.
And what'll happen is you'll find the people that like and love do the best. They may not be the smartest, but they work together the most because they care and they're invested in other success, right? It's just like, outside of your best friends and the closest people, you do anything for them. But when you walk out on the street with a stranger you don't know, you're not going to do the same thing.
Nothing. And it's so insane too. I think what else it makes so much sense is a lot of times, including my business, but I've seen it happen time and time again, you start the business and you have kind of this startup culture and this feeling, and it feels like a bunch of friends, and it feels like we're all just passionately really chasing this same dream. And it's not so much about financials or titles or all that stuff. And a lot of times you have a lot of quick success and something magic happens. And when you start to try to actually put in the talent and the structure and do things the right way, it falls apart or gets really, really difficult because you've lost a lot of that caring for one another. And you just think, I remember once again, when I was younger, I thought, man, you can just hire talented people from other companies and your company will be the best one, right? That's how it works. And it wasn't until you see that the new guy has a problem with this and they don't like the way this is happening. And now this group has built an entire clique to rebel against that one. And, it becomes this thing that I didn't realize.
And one of the things that I heard you point out is with Gerard Adams, right? With Elite Daily.
Yep.
He went out and raised all that funding. But because he trusted the people and cared about it, even though he was headstrong and getting it, and he was like, I'm going to get this funding and build his business, he got talked out of it because he trusted the people with him and cared and just said, wow, you've got some good points. And stop in the tracks. And if we're not on the same page, let's just get out, right? And I think that's exactly what businesses need to do on a larger scale, right? And when you can build that, then that happened, right? Because if he didn't with that person, he would have still been trudging forward and who knows what would have happened, right?
That's so true. The other thing is this. I think that there's something that happens with people, and I've seen this happen a lot to people, and I try to audit myself once a week to make sure that I'm not also becoming a victim of it. And that is that, like, you kind of got it with the bull in the china shop reference. And it's sort of like the people that need the help the most from people like you and from outside perspective and from awareness are the people that are obviously the least accepting of it or the least open to it. And people will just self-destruct. And one of the things that I learned from working with my friend Kevion is I always compare it to this. I compared it to, I worked for a long time out of anger or out of like, I'm going to prove you wrong, right? I was the younger brother. When I moved here, I was on a TV show with my older cousin. I was the younger cousin. I was always the lesser, right? And I was always this like, I'm going to prove my place in this world. And that was really effective. And I got a lot done because of it. But the problem was I did prove everyone wrong. I was successful. And then I was exhausted. And I was just sort of over it. And it was like, okay, so I proved everyone wrong, and now I'm just tired, and I don't even know why I did this, And it's sort of like, I always compare it to like, let's say a running back in the NFL. Let's just say all you learn is to mow people over. That probably works really well for a couple years. You're mowing everyone down. You're killing it, right? You're doing so well. Eventually, you're damaged, you're hurt, you're over it, you're beat up. You know what I'm saying? As opposed to the guy who maybe took the longer, better path, who learned how to take care of his body, take care of himself, learn the right routes, do things the right way. That guy's going to have a long,
or at least
successful
transition
career.
in his head, right?
Exactly.
Because I think what people always mistake is that you can use negative emotions and go a long ways with them, right?
And you need them.
Yeah, and I think it can be helpful. It's just that you have to have a transition to something else, right? Because if not, what happens is you wake up one day and you just get tired.
Yeah, with CT.
Because you lose the hate, right?
Yeah.
You just lose the other emotions and they're gone and you've got nothing to replace them with and you feel really empty because now you look back and thinking, I don't have anything positive to fill this. I have no direction. I'm just out of gas.
Yeah. And here was the other problem is there's always going to be someone to try to outdo. you're never going to win that battle, right?
Of course.
You know, and so it's like you can kind of go from, in my case, like younger brother, younger cousin, younger this, younger that. It's every time you get bigger, there's somebody else to put a target on their back, and that's a very just taxing, not fulfilling way to work. You know what I mean? So that was another thing that I learned from my thing. But I just think gaining that awareness really changed, I would say, my life and my business and how I approach things. And that's where I have so much respect for people like you and what you do, because you're able to do that. You're able to see it from a different point of view and really change people's minds. And I'm sure that you've seen it in action.
Well, the thing is, out of that is self-awareness brings you social awareness.
Yeah.
And your level of self-awareness is never more than social awareness. So what happens when you looked inside yourself and you found all these things, immediately then when you looked external, it opened up a whole nother world for you, because you took your self-awareness to the next level, and then automatically you take your social awareness too.
Yep.
And that just makes you, you know, a better leader, a better friend, a better everything, right?
And I try to, I mean, I would say I'm not too much of like, I try to stay away from coming off too preachy or too whatever, but I think that one of the number one flaws that I see in young people trying to start businesses or trying to go down this path or anything really of high level achievement is a lack of realistic vision of themselves. And whether it's the work that they've really done or the knowledge that they really have on any given topic, or that, you know, people tend to kind of see themselves in a slanted view and, you know, sometimes give themselves too much credit, sometimes think that the opportunity is bigger than it really is, thinking that the market for something is bigger than it is, you know? And I think that, once again, it's just, that's what's so cool, is the more that you can teach these younger people how to be clear and what the things to even be clear are about and how to practice that self-awareness, the more chance they have of succeeding, you know?
It's being humble and grateful, right? I mean, I think as a CEO, when you see it, you have to have unbridled positivity. I mean, that's just part of the fact. It's hard, but the most successful people are very humble because they don't care about the success for themselves. Right? And they don't get caught up in the ego cycle. You know, Ryan Holiday's ego is the enemy, right? They don't get caught up in that cycle near as much as the other people do. And that can be really dangerous, because then you start feeling invincible and you start feeling like, well, I started this business and I did that, so I can do the next thing, which is not the truth, because the next thing you're doing is completely different, new variables, new time, everything else. But you lull yourself into believing that you can do it because your ego is now taken over and you've not stayed humble, you've not stayed grateful, you've not done the little things that you did before, because now you've got a little taste of power and all of a sudden it's going to your head.
And what blows my mind is the people that haven't accomplished anything yet that still have that. I think it's a protection mechanism, right? Like I think that there are people that don't, and you would know better than I would, but I think that there are people, and that's why, let me clarify when I'm saying all this. My main goal with all this, with my podcast, I have a deep passion for just inspiring people to achieve better than what they thought they could, right? So that's why I'm going so hard on like, what are people's problems? I don't mean to tear apart young people, but what I'm saying is, I think that I see a lot of ego in people who have not accomplished anything, and people who are too good to get in the trenches and do the dirty work and do those things, who haven't even accomplished anything. It's like this weird protection, you know?
When you don't feel like you can go and do the menial stuff. I'm doing a startup and we have a bunch of interns, and I try to show them that I will do the same things they will, right? I put a spreadsheet together. I was looking up stuff the other day and put it in there and typed it in because I want to show my time is not any more or less valuable than yours, right? And I think that you have to train people that way in business. And if you're a leader, whether you're 20-something or whatever, you've got to be able to do that, because otherwise you forget the roots and don't stay humble, don't stay low, and don't realize that, like, I mean, this is what's required in order to do it, right? It's like you tell us, I mean, I hear you say it all the time, like you got to go all in and, you know, and you got to believe and you got to be there, and you can't. And you lose touch with the business too if you get on your high horse and you refuse to go do some of the menial stuff. Now, as you get bigger, you can't do as much because your time, there's an opportunity cost.
Sure.
But you can't be afraid and think it's below you to do that.
Yeah, agreed. So let's real quickly, because this is what I do here, go through your story, because I want to know like your background. I know you have you've lived a lot of life. You went through this path, you know what I'm saying? You worked to get here. And I want to know it. So where did you grow up? Where were you born and raised?
Well, I was born in Wausau, Wisconsin, which is a really small town in northern Wisconsin. And we didn't stay there that long. I had a tumor when I was really young and almost died. I had to go to like a Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. And my mom was a nurse anesthesiologist, and she's like one of the first ones, and she still practices right now, and her number is so low that it's like funny. I tell some of my friends who actually are, and they looked and they said, "What's your mom's like license number?" And it's like she
like
did it before they had nursing
0003,
school. Like,
yeah,
they didn't even. She didn't have to go to college. She just had to go to like a nursing school, and then they had some other program to teach you how to be like a nurse anesthesiologist on top of that, right? And she just did that, and so it was. So she identified that and took me, and I had a pretty large sized tumor in my stomach. And
what age?
I think it was like 1 or 2. I mean, yeah. So, and it was pretty bad situation, and they removed it, and then we made our way to Chicago when I was really small, and my mom had a lot of opportunities there, and my mom was a really big extrovert. And my dad, I think, was, but he was an engineer and just not as outgoing. And I think my mom just took the reins and just said, I'm going to live my life. And
that's cool.
Sort of took him along with it.
Yeah.
So.
And they divorced when you were young?
Yeah, they divorced when I was in 6th grade. They didn't really get along for a really long time. Like, they slept in different rooms, and they were just two different people. Yep. And my dad had, he let his health go. And I think mentally he wasn't all checked in. Yep. And so they were just so different people. It's just like night and day. I don't really know how they even stayed together as long as they were. Right? I like asked my mom or even my dad, like, how did you two ever get together? Because it made no logical, emotional, or any sense to me, even as a young kid at the time, why this was going on and why it had gone on. And they fought a lot too. So it was really, a disturbing household, right? And there was a time like my mom took a knife out of the drawer, and I thought, I don't know, and I got in between them. So I got in between some of the fights, and it just was like, I was really glad I remember them getting divorced, because I was like, finally, I'll get some peace.
Yeah.
That was the first word in my head, like going through the whole thing.
So that was a relief more than a
devastation.
It was a relief.
Yeah. I didn't even care. Like, I was just like, stop the madness, because there's nothing like trying to get in front of your parents at like midnight or 1 a.m. and then you have to go to school and you're like,
especially that young.
And then what? You can't make any sense of it. We didn't really have any close family friends, so there really wasn't any outlet. And then who are you going to talk to when you're 10, 11, 12? I mean, like, you don't even know how to process all of that stuff and what really went on.
Yeah, Jesus. Did you have brothers and sisters?
I didn't.
Just you?
Just me.
So it was literally just you trying to figure all that shit out.
Yeah.
Jesus. And what type of stuff were you into? What would you do for fun at that age? Or did you start to gravitate to passions or any of that stuff?
I was outside a lot, because my mom worked a lot, and then growing up too, my mom had leukemia and it was really bad. So she had to go that for quite a while. And then my mom also, because she didn't go to college, they instituted a rule that she had to go back and get her degree. So she had to fly from Chicago to Detroit like every month, on top of dealing with leukemia and all the rest of this stuff, and working, probably 60 hours a week in a hospital to keep all this stuff going. And my dad was just kind of checked out, right? He just wasn't really there. So it was better to get out of my house and hang out with friends and do anything outdoors, because 1, I didn't have to deal with my dad, right? 2, I didn't deal with any stress or drama. And then 3, I was around people having fun, and I was out in nature and doing stuff. So, I did stuff where we fished, we played, baseball, basketball, anything that we could, I could do to get out.
Yep. And at that age, like, so through high school, you didn't lock in on any dreams, or were you going around to your friends, like giving them executive coaching lessons? Hey, listen, Billy, if you just would care for the team a little bit better, your softball team would perform better. Did you at that age, like, did you start to wrap your head around what you think your career might be or anything like that? No?
I dabbled in a lot of things, I think, in high school and just tried a bunch of things and nothing really, you know, caught fire, but I was successful in some stuff. Like I tried out for a school play. I went to an all boys Jesuit school, which is really different because they don't talk about religion as much. It's more about service. Like the motto in our school is being a man for others. So like, you know, my junior year, I went to Cabrini Green and was doing latchkey kids. So I was working with a lot of, you know, different underprivileged kids and doing things. And, you know, the whole mantra all the time was help other people, serve other people. That's your job. So, you know, I was naturally curious. I was taking a lot of college prep school, you know, stuff. My mom was really into education. So I had just a lot of work and studying to do on top of this. So it was just hard to, and for my mom, doing well in school was a badge for her that she was doing a good job as a parent.
Yeah.
So she gauged that by like what I was doing.
Yeah. How interesting. Did she obviously beat the leukemia?
Yeah, she did.
That's
but
crazy.
She's really lucky because she worked at one of the biggest trauma hospitals and went to Sloan Kettering and got experimental drugs and a lot of things I think that eventually saved her. And she wouldn't have access because, you know, today there's, you know, waiting lists and stuff. And back then, I mean, when you know all these doctors, I mean, you just get in, right? And they just find a way. And you're working at the biggest hospitals. And, you know, my mom worked at the hospital, Cook County, where they filmed ER, that TV show a long time ago, and was there and saw that.
That's cool.
Worked at the second biggest trauma hospital with gunshots and knife wounds. My mom would tell me people coming in and blood squirting everywhere and just, you know, back in the old days where people would do surgeries and they didn't need to, doctors would sign. I mean, it's just like, you imagine healthcare back there and now the costs now and the stories my mom told me, it's unreal what they did.
Oh, I bet.
And the money they made too. And the money they made too. It wasn't like they were making, you know, crazy money more. I mean, they were making a lot of money back then and doing a lot of things they shouldn't have been doing too. So clearly.
That's what's funny is anytime someone like talks about how crazy things are now, I'm sure there's a lot of things that are absolutely crazy right now, but like you just think about those sort of things, you know, like how much we have evolved and like it was just a bit of a free for all in some places, that being one of them.
There's no oversight. There's no real there's no transparency, right? A doctor comes in and says, oh, I did anesthesia work and my mom's looking at this thing and wasn't even in the room and, you know, charges someone $1,500. I remember that number too. And I mean, you know, just like walking by, like just think if you were walking by in the office and just signed something saying, hell, there's another $1,500 in my account that's just going to go in there tomorrow, right?
That must be nice, man. So then what about college? What about when college time came around? What sort of was going on then?
So I went to Indiana University because I had a lot of friends going to University of Illinois and everywhere else. And I just wanted to go somewhere on my own. I just wanted to make it on my own and not just be held back by friends or doing anything else. And, you know, I really loved school. It was a lot of fun. And I really started to master socializing with people and meeting them and understanding how to build great relationships with people because in some ways it was default. Because I didn't have anyone. So I was forced to do it. But because of all of that, you know, eventually I got to run for student body treasurer and we won. And we did this crazy election where I was with this ragtag group of people, you know, some guys like way overweight. One of my really good friends from high school that was kind of a hippie. And then we had a woman who's a lesbian and going against this straight-laced, more typical Bloomington, you know, and we end up winning the election. And then somehow the ballot boxes, you know, there were numbers or something that weren't adding up. So we had to do a whole other redo election. And I'd spent all this time and we had like 100 people involved in this thing. And I had to rally all these people to do it all again. Cause it was it was like 4 months of just doing this pretty intensely, staying up all night. And some stuff. And so it was,
that had to be fun. I mean, was that like that had to be a bit of a like breakthrough at that age of like a big success.
It was
gathering a team and
because we did a lot of cool stuff. Like we had a 1% initiative that we got passed through the board of the school to hire more teachers to lower the student rate. But then like all administration, what they did the following year after that, after hiring more teachers, they cut the budget back by 1%. So we did and we did a lot of diversity stuff on campus too, because there were some issues that we really got into. And I thought like really made some pretty significant social change for just a bunch of kids that, you know, really we're just figuring out as we're going along against people who were administrators and, you know, had everything locked down. And,
cool.
you know, you walk in these meetings with 10 people who've faculty and writing books like this, and you have to try to, you know, get influence. You got to get buy-in. You got to do all this stuff with people, and you don't even really have any clue how, and no one shows you. And you just have to figure out how to build relationships with people and do it well to get anything done and to advance any piece of an agenda that you want to do.
Yeah, that's such an incredible learning experience. Did you ever think you might have a future in politics or no?
No, I think all that stuff that happened, I was like, I wasn't really that interested. I mean, even in the back of my head a little bit, but I was like, I don't know if I really want to go down this road again. Like, it was just, there was just a lot of work and a lot of headaches and just all these crazy things you have to deal with, like, all the time. And I thought to myself, like, I just don't know if I really want to get involved. And a lot of the people I did deal with, I really didn't like. It was just like trying to change like cement like into something. It's like so hard. It literally have to just chip it away till there's nothing there. And I was like, man, I don't know if I want to do this my whole life with all of these other people.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I can't imagine that life. Like the life of like a just true politician is brutal. Okay, go ahead.
But it was fun too because, you know, I got to meet a lot of people. I mean, I was involved in my fraternity. I was in like everything. So like I took my parents out one night to the bars, which I never have done ever. Yeah. And we walked around and it took us like almost all night to get from one side of the bar all the way around with all the people. And my parents were like, you know, everyone on a campus is 36,000 people. And I said, I guess I do know a lot of people. And it was,
that's a gift.
Yeah, it was interesting. But again, I go back to the fact that like I had to have these people in my life because you know, I would have father-son golfing outings and my dad wouldn't come down. So I'd be like the only person, you know, really without one. And in my fraternity, it was like 100 people. I remember one time we were doing it and I was like all by myself. And it's like,
so you had to learn.
You just had to cope. And I didn't really know any better at the time, but it definitely was hard, I think, later in life to build some closer relationships at some level because you didn't really have any role models.
Yeah.
And you questioned everything when it got down to that level.
That's true. How interesting. What did you major in?
Well, I majored in history, and then I got a minor in econ, Spanish, and religious studies.
Got it. And then did you have a plan of sort of why that combination, what you were going to do with that combination or no?
Honestly, I just love the teachers.
Yeah.
I found teachers and I kept taking more and more classes with them, you know? I took a graduate class in like public health or something and I loved the teacher and he like sort of was a mentor for me. So, you know, I had some idea that my mom always in my head told me, be a doctor, be a lawyer.
Yep.
Because that's what she thought I should do, which is the safe bet, which is really not me. Mm-hmm. But I did it because I don't want to disappoint my mom and all she had done, and she was really good, I think, at guilting me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
moms are good at that.
They really are. And when your mom is the driving force in your life, you know. And then I went back and I thought about it a few years ago. Like all the driving forces in my life were women.
Yeah,
my two grandmothers and my mom, and you know that just was like I wanted to make them all happy. And so I ended up going to law school and I thought about, oh, well, I could do crisis communication. So, and I went to Syracuse and went to Newhouse because it's the #1, you know, communication school. And I was like, okay, we'll just go and, you know, do that. Yeah. And just, I didn't really even think, would it make me happy? Would I like it?
Yeah.
I just didn't really even consider that there was another way. Mm-hmm. And I had no entrepreneurial influences, right? Because most of the time when I'm coaching people, one of the things that I notice is that the people who are entrepreneurs early had some sort of influence, right? That was close to them, or they basically said, fuck you to the world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You'll find other variances, but you won't really find many of them.
Yeah. That makes sense.
It's in either camp, and I didn't really have either one. So, you know, I just said, okay, well, just law school seems like a good thing to do. Yeah. Let's just go.
Yeah. And what, like, how long into that did you finish law school?
I did.
And so I guess what I'm wondering then is like, when did it hit you that isn't what you wanted to do? Was it before you finished? Like while you're in law school, are you starting to feel like, oh, this isn't connecting? I'm not passionate about this? Or
yeah, I did. One of the things that really hit me was I was interviewing in New York City and other places for jobs during my second year. And, I built great relationships with the third-year law students. So, they told me all the questions and like everything to do. And so I had this thing like war gamed out and, every step of the way, right? I had like a battle plan. I was a general and I had little things placed. I mean, I knew everything. Even some of the interviews, some of the people, I knew who they were, what they liked. I mean, I had like books and sheets and like a playbook like Bill Belichick going, and I was so prepared. It was unreal. But they all said, at the end, ask some easy question, and it was the only question that I didn't ask because I was like, an easy question. I mean, I got all this covered. It's got to be pretty simple.
Yeah.
Well, every interview, the last question I would ask is some version of, are you happy?
Yeah.
And he didn't realize at the time how naive that question really is. Every interview, and it was 30-some interviews, it was the longest for me to ask the question for people to answer from a senior partner level down to an associate level. And I could tell that they were, either not telling the truth, confused, something.
Yep.
Like something was really off. Because when enough people do the same thing, your brain starts to show you a pattern. And all of a sudden it was like, there's something weird in these interviews, right? And I was driving home and I thought, oh my God, like these people really don't like what they're doing, right? And then I had this epiphany. I said, what makes me think I'm Michael Jordan, that I can create a career that all these people can't do? Like, there's some really smart people. And then I thought to myself, I'm not the best lawyer. I'm good, but I'm an extrovert. So me sitting in a room by myself all the time doing this is going to drive me crazy.
Yeah.
So the way that I'd have to make money and do well would be a rainmaker, right?
Yeah.
And I'd be the guy going out to 2, 3 in the morning, and then I'd have to be doing stuff, and then I'd be dead at 50, right?
Yeah.
I'd probably be really wealthy and doing well.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be a great attorney, but they couldn't get rid of me because business development, I would just have it in the back of my hand because I could do this. But I was like, I saw my life flash before my eyes, and I'm like, this is not a recipe that I'm going to wake up and I'm going to want to be doing.
Yeah, that's smart, man. Even just to have that moment, that's that awareness we're talking about, you know what I mean? But to have it that clear and sort of track your whole life and be like, well, and there I am at 50, exhausted and dead. Like, I need to reel this back in. So what'd you do? What was your correction? Or how'd you adjust?
Yeah, but and one of the things in all the interviews I've heard you talk about is that, everyone thinks you're crazy and you get no confirmation. So people in the career service department, try to talk me out of it. Like I didn't have any support, right?
Yeah,
None,
yeah.
zero. So the thing that I loved is technology because I'm really curious. And I was like, I'm going to go out to Silicon Valley and I'm just going to find a way.
Yeah.
And that's what I did.
That's what you did.
And that's what I did,
So
right?
how old were you at that point? Like 24?
Yeah, like 24. And
Right.
I just made some calls and talked to some people and got into, really the biggest and best technology PR and marketing agency in, Silicon Valley, and just started out there and, making less money than I would have made in a more expensive city. But I was really passionate about it. And it was something that I knew that, I would love because I've always been a really curious person and I love to learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
So getting an environment like that, we're an agency with all these different clients, and it's back in 97, 98, where this whole thing's taking off and you're a part of all this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just like,
Just the energy.
oh,
Just feel it.
unreal.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been in an environment where there's that level of energy. And I don't know if I will ever be in that place because it's just insane. Like literally energy could just light up the entire city 24/7.
Yeah. It's insane. That's why I love that when you feel, even when we do stuff, like we'll have meetings with, I don't know, influencers or artists or rappers or whatever. And like, you just can feel when you're you got the right thing, and when it's someone or something that connects with what you're doing and it's just people are working and moving and it just feels good. And it's the way I felt when I first moved to LA. And LA was always my dream city to move to. And I always say the same thing. I don't think that I'll ever feel that feeling again as when I first moved to LA, because I was also super passionate about skateboarding. And this is like the skateboard capital of the world. And it's just, I find myself chasing that energy frequently, like trying to find it. And, oh, that's it. We got it, because you know when you got it. But I can only imagine that Silicon Valley in that time must have just been like
just on fire, on fire everywhere. And I got to work with great people like, you know, Steve Jobs at Pixar, and they won the business when it went over to Apple, a small little agency taking on everyone. And, you know, I got to meet Mark Cuban. We worked on Yahoo when they bought him, and just all these people, and, you know, VCs that are well known and famous. And at the time, like these people were successful, but not legends like they are right now. I mean, you didn't really know what you were experiencing and a part of.
Yeah.
Right? Because there was just no way. I mean, there was an insane amount of smart people you're around, like all the time.
Yeah.
That it's hard to appreciate that, especially at that age, because you don't have any experience to tell you that's, you know, something magical to be in. But I look back and I think, wow, I looked through some of my LinkedIn and some of the people, or I'll come across someone, I'm like, wow, I worked with you and look what you're doing now. Like that's
insane. It's like the stories of like Sunset Boulevard and like the music golden era, you know, like with Janis Joplin, and you'd walk down and the Roxy, there'd be this person and the Beatles and the, you know, whatever, like just crazy. It's cool. Really cool. What did that do to so me trying to wrap my head around it from the outside, you kind of got a really good education, did a lot of hard work, but then you made this complete 180 into a totally different world. You feel that energy, you feel all this stuff going on. I'm guessing you're loving it. Like, what did that do to your perspective and your approach, and what started to shape the rest of your life at that point? How did that happen? How'd that
You know, it was just, we went back to a lot of relationships, because in the agency, I was the only person that didn't have to report into anyone but the CEO of the company. And I wasn't that, I was like a mid-level person, but I had such great relationships with my clients. And I had such value that they were just like the VPs or like, or anyone else are like, we don't even need to talk to them. Like, we just rather, if you spend more time and get the CEO to come a little bit here and there, we'd be happy. And so I was managing a lot of business there and doing it all by myself, and had a lot of autonomy, and it was, you know, great, and I had great clients. And then they would also give me clients that were really mad ones. They, you know, we had a weekly meeting with, you know, green, yellow, and red, and I'd inherit the red clients and have to make them. And, you know, slowly but surely I would. And, you know, when you're part of an agency and growing it, and they made it seem like a family, you just sort of did that. And I didn't really have a family. So in some ways it was a surrogate family for me, which was actually really negative, because when it's attached to money at some point, leaving, I had a pretty bitter taste in my mouth, you know?
Yeah, it's true. And where did you go? Like, how does this transition into, like, is that when you started realizing that you had a knack for team building and working with people, or not yet?
I went to some startups and nothing really got off the ground. I went with some, you know, really brilliant people, but just the ideas and the funding and the timing, everything just started to like fall apart. And then I started to get disillusioned, because I had a going away party every week for a friend. I was just kind of getting sick of being in this downturn where everything was just like, I mean, you're in such a pool of negativity. It's just hard to exist on a daily basis when, you know, you have people committing suicide, you have people who just like liquidating everything and moving into some small little apartment, and just like, you know, they had a story in the Wall Street Journal about a repo man going in and basically every day taking a new Lamborghini or Ferrari and breaking in and doing it. And that was his job every day. And he just had to get as many as he could, because they were all over the place. Right. And people were living on stock options that they didn't have. And like, it just cratered. And it just was like, you know, I wanted to get out. And then I had a couple friends of mine whose parents just died weird ways. Like, one of them was running in an indoor track and had a heart attack. And I thought to myself, like, you know, I hadn't been around my mom in a really long time, and it was hard to see her, but maybe, you know, a couple times a year. I thought, I need to move to Dallas, because she had moved to Dallas, you know, for a couple years, because at least if something happened, I'd have spent some time with her. So I couldn't get to Dallas, but I got to Austin. And then one of my mentors, I got a job, signed, sealed, was going in there and signing the paperwork. And he's like, I got a better job for you. And he drove me to a startup company where they hired me that was based in Dallas.
Oh, wow.
That's how I made it to Dallas.
So you got it to Dallas.
And it was a software company in Montana. And it was, you know, it was an interesting ride. We went public like the same month as Google. And
so that was a success.
That was a success, right? I mean, there were, you know, it was still hard times and it wasn't near as much. And again, you know, we had this weird thing where we had some reverse stock split and, you know, like it was the CEO owned a lot of the company. And it was just, it was weird being in an organization where everyone was sort of not happy about it because, and so that was like another piece that, you know, it seemed like there was always some disillusionment in this whole process, you know, and it was always just doing that and then starting back up and building these relationships. And, you know, I started to figure out a few things, but it took me still probably several years later. And then it wasn't until I started more helping people, because when I moved to Dallas, I didn't know anyone. And I started to get involved in charities and nonprofits and just, you know, I didn't know anyone. So I started walking around the room and introducing strangers to other strangers, acting like I was the mayor and running it. And I didn't even know. And people believed it. And then pretty soon people meeting all these people and I got to be friends with them, but no one went back and said, well, how did you know that person? Right. I just said, well, I know this person. I put people together. And I think you do it, all of a sudden, like this sort of, you know, magic happens. And then I just realized at some point that, you know, I could help people really build social lives. And I pitched an idea to someone who had an existing business out in LA. And we started to, you know, do something on the side as I was still working in corporate America. But I wanted to do something more in business. You know, it wasn't fulfilling enough just to do that alone. It was a start.
And what was that concept? What was that?
How to build a social life in 30 days or less. I wrote a book on it. I mean, I came up with it because that's just like, I was like, okay, well, why not have something great? You don't really need to wait a long time. You just got to have a plan. And the plan is you have to go meet people in groups, because then you can get to know people at a much deeper, easier level without the opportunity cost of going one-on-one. And if you leverage groups, you can meet a lot of people. And then, you know, meeting your best friends and people then is more of a numbers game.
So what's that look like? Like what's the epitome of a group sort of atmosphere that's good to get in? Let's say you move to a new city and you're looking for that sort of.
So I would go to a charity organization, meaning like in Dallas, there's like Young Texans Against Cancer. American Heart Association has groups, right? Because you have successful people. That's where they go, right? Because they're trained from other successful people. They're mobile. They're young professionals. They're, you know, doing well. But when you're in an, you know, something like that, people are more giving and open to meet you. Right. It's not like you're going out to a bar where people's defenses are up. So you can meet everyone in the group, right? Easily. And remember, all those people have friends behind them too. And so what I started doing was I realized that a lot of those people were doing those other things. And then I'd go to museum groups and then all of a sudden I would do is I'd get people's information, contact information. And then I invite people out and saying, oh, I'm getting a bunch of people together for happy hour, which in the beginning I had no one, right? I just said that because I figured, okay, someone's got to show up, right? And then, you know, I'd happy hours and they would get 5, 10, 15, 20. And then I started to throw charity stuff where I get 300-400 people to come out. And I just learned how to work the door. And then I learned that when you walk in a room and you're like anyone's throwing a party, this works so great. As people walk in the door, if you introduce them to other people, they get out of their head. They don't have no social anxiety. And they start to remember and recreate the happiest moments they've had in their life where they knew the entire room and they act like they do. And then pretty soon you have a whole room of people operating at their social maximum. You can create a lot of energy and things special where people then want to come back. And they don't understand. And essentially, you did it for free, right? All you did was you were a gracious host. And you just help people. And I learned a lot of this stuff by reading some stuff here and there and then just some common sense.
And you just have a gift for it. I mean, you did it since high school.
You
know what I mean? Like you just have a natural, I would say that's one of my shortcomings. You know what I'm saying? Is I'm a relatively, I'd say the word antisocial seems a little negative, but I kind of stick to my small group and that's about it. You know, and I just think one place where I would be a little bit more successful, if nothing else, is if I was better at remembering to and then following up and bringing people together. You know, it's a gift. It's a gift and it's also a learned skill that is really effective.
It's really effective, right, for people, because that's where the greatest learning goes. That's where, you know, you meet great people. And the other thing about it too is it's okay when you go and transition through life patterns and don't have a lot of people with you because you have the belief, right, that you can get to the next place, right? I remember Erica in the interview said this, something like that, like you got to believe in yourself when no one else does. Well, it's the same thing, right? And you can transition people that aren't coming with you, because what I see a lot of people is you'll see relationships get 70-30.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's where a lot of people get bitter and they have all these bad breakups, rather than just letting it go and saying, you know, that person is just happy where they're at. It's neither good nor bad. They just don't want to go where I'm going to go. So I need to walk away from them and find new people.
Yeah, learning that is so important too. I think a lot of people will ride a bad relationship into the ground. You know what I mean?
And it negatively affects you in a big emotional way, because if you have really, really close friends, breaking up with them is like a divorce of sorts. Now, I've never been married and divorced, but my friends all tell me that when they're going through it and afterwards, and when I've interviewed people and spoke to them about this. So you've got to find a way to transition out of those moments if you can, rather than stay to the bitter end, because there's a lot of things, skeletons that stick in your closet for a long time because of that.
Yeah. And I think also people just don't realize how much effect that truly has on. I mean, there's that, once again, that saying that we've all heard on repeat, that you're the sum of the 5 people closest to you.
It's true.
It's so true. And I think I learned that more as I get older, and people don't understand how true that is. And I also think that people think that they're strong enough to deal with everyone's problems, right? So like if you have a friend that's just a complainer or negative Nancy or whatever, you just think like, oh, well, that's not affecting me. Like I can deal with that. You know, you just don't realize how much it truly does. And I think that's another lesson. And a lot of people don't take to it easily because they think that there's value. And don't get me wrong, for a certain select couple people in everyone's life, it's worth it to be there with them through thick and thin. But I think that to build a social circle full of negative people is a terribly toxic idea, and people don't know how valuable that really is.
Yeah, and I think you lose part of yourself trying to be Oprah every single day in every group of people that you're at, right? I mean, like you have your own life to live, and you're not there trying to solve problems. And I think, you know, now my friends are having problems. I realize, you know, and having a lot of women in my life, they've always told me, listen, I'm not here for you to solve my problems. And I think as a man, you always have to remember that, because otherwise you try to put your values and what you want in other people. And that rarely works unless they're on the same wavelength you are.
Yeah, it's so true. So that's the thing that you worked on with your friend from LA, is writing that book and starting that thing?
Yeah, I kind of wrote most of the book and had him just do it. It was more of like, I wanted to put something out there, and I'd done research and, you know, I had seen, you know, Keith Ferrazzi's book and I liked it. I thought that there was a lot of good parts in Never Eat Alone, but I felt like there was just a lot of stories, and I wanted to have a book that was just like a blueprint, right? I feel like a lot of times when people write books, they write all these stories because they feel like they need to give social proof to act as if they're important enough to impress other people. And I'm like, if you want that, great. Read 300 pages, but really you just need 75.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, because you need, you know, 75% of a book to convince you to do it. That says a lot more about where you're at and why it won't be successful. Because you're in the taking mode. You're not in the giving mode.
Yeah. That's true. So is that what transitioned your life into this?
It did, because it opened up the door to see what was possible, right? I mean, I put a glimpse in and I was like, this just isn't great. And then I started to connect the dots that every time in a company, when I was doing technology stuff, when I was working on a product launch, I was like knocking it out of the park. Like I just, because I was dealing with all these outside people and bringing them together and preparing. But then when I had to go back in the company and do the mundane things, I would drop, and so would my performance. And it was like riding this, you know, up and down. And I realized that that wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't something that I liked to do. So I had to find, you know, another way. And the only thing that I didn't know how to do enough was how to create behavioral change like super fast with people. Not, you know, like a therapist would do it in a year, but I knew high performing people wouldn't do that. So I started to, one of the things that I've been good at is finding people when they haven't reached rock star status, but they are, and they don't know they're there yet.
Yeah.
And then been able to work with them for super cheap and learn, and then take that and then move to the next level. Because going to law school, doing all this research, I mean, I can sit in the internet and just sit there and get lost and find the answers and put them together, because I had to do it essentially, you know, most of my life, high school and everything else, just working in all these classes where it was a requirement of, you know, having to really press yourself and come up with this stuff and find, you know, nuggets, you know, and needles in haystacks.
Yeah. That's so cool. Did the book do well, the first book?
Did all right. I mean, we really didn't know what we were doing with it.
Yep.
And, you know, and the other thing too is that the next book I wanted to write was more, you know, how to build great business relationships and putting something together. And so in the process of, you know, of that book and going forward, I started to interview people. I started to ask a lot of questions. I started to get a lot more inquisitive, successful people, what they were doing, how they were going about it, how they were thinking about relationships, what they were saying. And then I sort of put these things all together and kept testing it and throwing it out and, you know, saying, would this work? Or what do you think about this to people all the time?
Yeah.
And so then I just kind of fine-tuned it and wrote the next book, Social Wealth, like over, you know, probably like 13 or 14 months.
Yep.
But I knew that I had to find people to help me market it.
Yep.
So I found, you know, some people that were doing really great stuff, but they had just started out.
Yeah.
And I knew they had hit on something because I had interviewed and talked to a lot of people who were trying to sell me these outrageous packages. And these guys were just, you know, young and hungry and doing this. So it was pretty fun. And I got to leverage a lot of it. And I didn't need the writing part of it. I just need the marketing part of it. And they had a lot of really genius ideas that helped market the book. Like I got a lot of reviews early. I did stuff on YouTube. I mean, there's a lot of things that were nuanced, small things that really help it get out of the gates really strong without having any brand or really having anything that I could leverage on my own. I had to do a lot of this stuff grassroots and literally email people and do this stuff like one by one to get people to take any action, and then they would, right? But it was a slog in the beginning, right? And then just trying to figure all this stuff out, because I also had wanted to do more executive coaching, but the people that I had approached to try to learn from a mentor, all were working on the external world and doing more things I thought was sexy. And I was like, I knew the answer was inside. I hadn't quite figured it out completely, but I knew the answer was that if you're broken on the inside or you feel like you are, how can this be good? All this is putting on a mask and taking money, right?
And do you think there's a lot of that in your world or in the coaching world or the? Because
you have to sit with people through really difficult times and not reach out to them and just let them sit in absolute discomfort, uncertainty, cry, and not tell them it's going to be okay, because you don't know that it is. Right? And you don't know when it's going to get better. You can give them certainty saying, hey, if you do these things, you're going to reach the other side, because you're going to reach a level of transparency and you're going to dig so deep that you can't help but get in a much better place and get out of your rock bottom moment. But you don't know how long it's going to take. You don't know what's going to be required of someone in order to get that done, right? And initially, when you meet with someone, like I've had a few people, I mean, I've had to refer out, right? I mean, I know that they have deep issues and they have to see a therapist, right? It's not something that I can handle or do, right? And a specialized person at that.
Man, how interesting. Okay, let me ask you this. Did the second book do much better than the first?
Yeah, it sold like it's a little bit over 50,000 copies so far.
That's huge.
So,
and what was the moment, like, was there a moment when you felt like this part of your career and in coaching and in this stuff that you really wanted to do, like sort of caught and you felt like, oh, I'm on to something, or this book did really well, or was it all just kind of a slow, gradual build?
It was a slow, gradual build I'd have with clients. You know, I had one really successful client that went to the TED conference and got some massive deals by doing exactly this. He basically just got some people together with someone else he knew, and we had flown in wine from Texas to Vancouver, and we made a joke saying, hey, we had to bring along our own wine. And then I had him have, booze in his room at 2 a.m. in the morning so people would have somewhere to go, because people want to talk at that point, right? So we thought about all this stuff. And now he's on the board of TEDx and on X Prize with a small group of with all that stuff, and built up all this stuff, and things have really exploded and giving him a lot more opportunities, over the last 3 years. And so I think when I saw that, I realized that it was all possible because I helped him initially in the inside. So now when he walks in a room full of people are attracted to people's vulnerability because it's courageous. And he has no problem laying everything else out because he dealt with a lot of demons that he had along the way. And he or she, I've had a lot of women do that too, but you have to go to that place. And then when you stand in front of a room full of people, you're uber confident because you know what you have to do. And other people do too, and other people see that vulnerability. And you don't have any armor on when you're walking in that room, and they know, like, man, like that's leadership, right? That's someone who's got their thing together, whatever they're doing. Like, I want a piece of that, whatever it is. I had one of my clients, this CEO of the company, Worldwide Express. He was, I was working with the chairman. He's like, whatever you're doing with him, I want some of that. And that was like literally the first thing, and it was, pretty funny at the time because I thought to myself, but it was something that really helped me move forward was to be able to do that. But I had to learn how to sit with people and help them internally and put that together, and that was really hard to do.
You deal with, like, I didn't realize how deep sort of the real personal issues that you're dealing with.
Oh, they're really deep, I mean, it's stuff where people, that a client of mine has had abuse issues. They went to, he and his wife were, in and out for 20 some years, and, just 5 marital therapists. And I had him do some radical stuff like going to art therapy, abuse survivor, and all this stuff. And I told him, I said, in 6 months, if you do all this stuff, you will get back together with your wife, and it will be the best marriage you've ever had. And I didn't even know this. I had to believe it more than him. And I had him do radical stuff like art therapy and painting with kids because there really wasn't any adults. He was in a big city. And he did all this stuff. And literally almost 6 months today, his whole family's back together and happier than he's ever been before, and has convinced his wife to believe him and go through this path, because she saw at some point that someone couldn't be bullshitting it if, like, they were that committed, because no one would do it. But I was like, you can't force anything on her. You got to let her come in her own time and just keep communicating. And eventually she's going to get so curious that she's going to want to go in and do more and more stuff that she knows it's real. And you're going to be able to have conversations with her you never did before, because you're going to be able to piece all this, your life together and all the things that had happened. And I think, a lot of times that just happens in, even in marital therapy, right? It's like, you can't go in a room and have a conversation with someone else when you haven't looked at the patterns that are holding you back, blind spots, trauma, and have dealt with it on your own, because that's going to be the things they're holding back, right? If you're a poor listener growing up and you walk in a room and someone says, listen, brute force rarely works, right? New Year's resolutions rarely work, right? It's hard because there's all these other, we have 6 to 7 unconscious messages a day go in our head, and we're aware of 60 to 70, right? I mean, like, how are you ever going to get to the next level? And that's really what it comes down to, right? And I mean, and then I realized that with all my clients, and I'm like, that's why I tell every one of them, you're going to get exponential results. You'll get massive ROI. Because when you look back in your life and you put it all together and understand why your parents were doing it, why you married someone, you came from an alcoholic family, why is it that your spouse has, an alcoholic parent too? Like, these are all patterns, and it's pattern recognition. And then you don't feel like you're broken. You just connected the dots and realize you did what you did because this is the patterns and things that you're attracted to. And now you just have to change the pattern and you'll get another outcome. But if you don't, you won't be successful. So no matter what you do, it won't work, right? Or you'll just get incremental lift. That's why most training in organizations is broke, right? Because like I had a CEO who, told me a leadership problem. And then I talked to his executive team people for 5 minutes each. And they all said he doesn't listen. And then I went back and asked questions and grew up in a family of 6 kids. Got recognition for talking over one another. Had other instances like that. And I said, you realize that you just don't listen. And here's why. And you realize that they're telling you that feedback. And if you don't change, you're going to lose them all. And performance in this company is going to go down. You're going to lose, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. So what are you going to do?
So in that instance, do you prescribe like a solution? Like, do you say like, here is a practice of how to listen better?
Yes. Like one of the things is when you're in a meeting, right? This is for any senior leader, right? So if you're in a meeting with all people here, you speak last. You never speak first, because what happens is then you're going to have confirmation bias, right? And you need to listen.
Explain what a confirmation bias is.
Well, I mean, basically what happens is that if you go out in a meeting and saying, you know what, I think we should go do more YouTube advertising. Well, everyone's going to probably agree with you or try to get more information to do that because they don't want to take you on unless they absolutely know that they have counter information. And even then, they'll be afraid because then you might not like them, get mad that you're embarrassing in front of the group, right? So people just confirm what you already know and then lead you to make a poor decision, right? Like I'll have them do empathy exercises, like actually sit there and say to yourself, well, how do you think the other person is thinking and feeling? Really, right? Not, and then you can better answer, right, what's going on, right? I have people do temperature checks, right, where they go around the room and ask, okay, is it sunny outside for you? Is it just cloudy or is it storming? And why, right? And give someone a minute. Because then if you're in a meeting, you know how everyone thinks and feels around the table. And if you have an agenda to brainstorm and 3 of the people are checked out, you've now wasted that meeting and how much money? But if you haven't, one, as a leader, you know what's going on with your people, that you can manage it. 2, you can change the agenda, right? And so you're much more nimble and you get a lot more done.
Okay, this might be a stupid question for you, but this is something that is, I don't know, I think that is more apparent after hearing you talk than I thought. But like, would you say that professional success and personal, I'll say, stability are like undeniably linked?
They are. There are people that can compartmentalize them for a period of time.
But never forever.
But never forever, because eventually the walls cave in.
So that's why you always try to track it back to a personal story, habit, fix, adjustment. It almost always, you've seen in your experience that it almost always connects back to something like that.
Almost always something under 10 years old or some trauma that happened that's pretty significant. That's if it's beyond that, right? It almost always does. And you have to link it to that, because then you're going to find outcomes. And then when you start explaining it to people, the understanding of the pattern that's going on then allows people to change, because if you don't, they feel like they're broke. And when people feel like broke, they feel negative and they retrench. And then they rebel and they don't embrace it, because then they think that, well, there's someone else out there that's, doesn't have these problems, and I'm an imposter, right? And
can we talk about that?
Yeah, that's
the most common. I don't know who wrote the article or what the hell ever. Every one of the most common messages I get from my listeners, followers, whatever, is that they're suffering from imposter syndrome, and how do they fix it?
Everyone has it.
That's the thing that you wrote.
Every CEO I work with, no matter how big of the company, no matter what they've done, they're all afraid that it's going to fall apart at any moment. And they've convinced themselves to link it to something that then is about their persona and who they are.
Like what?
Well, if they don't deliver this or sell the company or get this revenue target, they're going to let everyone down. They're going to let their family down, right? And then it's going to be a mark against them.
So everyone has it. Everyone has told you about it.
There's not a single person. The thing about it is why people don't hear it, right? Is that when a CEO or an executive walks around, their unbridled positivity, because they know that they have to be in that place, you think, you look at that and you say, well, how can that be an imposter? Look at that person. And they're just good at telling everyone that because that they know they have to do that, and they're monitoring and, you know, other people, and they see that that's a necessity to do that, and they've talked to other people and they all tell them that.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's you know, like Tony Soprano said in the episode, like, no one knows what it's like to be the number one. It's the loneliest place to be when you have to make every decision hinges on you, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's a lot of pressure, and that's a lot of implosion that goes on. And if you don't have like sounding boards, you don't have enough self-awareness, you don't have support, right? And support not meaning like you need other people at your level. Because if you just have to tell a stranger a story, right? Or someone who doesn't get sitting in the chair like you, like running the company, you now have to tell them all these extra details. That gets tiring, and at some point you're like, I don't want to do that. But if you talk to someone else who's running another business, they're like, oh, Drum, I know all that, right? Like, I get it, right? I like, okay, what's the real nugget here, right? And you have to tell 10% of what's going on. The other 90 you skip, and then you get to the support, empathy, help, whatever you need, right? And you need to have that because the isolation ends up killing you, literally, because loneliness rates in the United States are at 40%. 4 out of every 10 people feel like they're alone, and it's really negatively affecting our culture in a significant way, not just personally, but also professionally, in what people are able to do, right? Because now people are walking into work, and that's their social life.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that.
Right? And it's never really been the case where it's been at the level it is now.
Why? Well, can I ask you one thing before? Because I want to go down this road, but I just want to ask you one thing because I hear it so much. If, let's say 31-year-old owner of a clothing line, or even 23-year-old starting a new business, feeling some success, is suffering from feeling like an imposter, what are some exercises or anything that we can do to manage it?
One of the things you can take a look at is, Brene Brown talks about shame. And I think a lot of ways this just mimics this, right? Because the silence and secrets lead to judgments, which then leads you down the rabbit hole. And the key is you have to find trusted people that you can share this with. Not everyone, but trusted people, right? So it could mean there's a board member, right, that you trust. It could mean you need to seek out other people that maybe like you and get to know them, and you may be able to form your own support group, right? You have to begin to share your stories with other people that have earned the right to hear them, because otherwise you feel like you're all alone, right? I mean, that's the purpose in having like even a coach with a lot of my clients, right? Like I know more about them than their own wives or husbands know. Because they can tell me without judgment, and they know I'm here to help them and support them. And I'm not here to tell them what to do necessarily, right? And then that they know that, right? So sometimes I think to myself, like, I'm sort of their own chief of staff in a way. A lot of times my job like rolls into that because they're sharing stuff with me because they can at least bounce ideas or hear themselves think by talking about this, so then they can take the idea to the next level and have someone to talk to. So I think you have to form these things. And also, if you don't, it can lead to delusional thinking, let your ego get in the way because there's nothing to check it with someone else that's going to be able to tell you it, that's got no vested interest in the outcome, right? Like a CEO of the company, like no one's going to stand up there and tell him, right, that he's wrong. I will, and I have no problem. And that's why my clients, I've got great relationships because they know if I tell them that I think they're doing something wrong, that I care and I want the best for them, not that I want to be right. Right?
It's interesting because I can even feel it. I can even feel it sometimes in my business, and I have 40 employees, but I can feel when I'm having a conversation and people are agreeing with me because I'm the leader. And I don't even like looking at myself as like the boss or like you need to like respect me for no reason than because I say so and straighten up or I'll fire you. I hate that. And I just want to be one of the group, right? Meaning I want to be the leader, but I want us all to be working together. And I can tell sometimes when I'm in meetings or whatever, and people are agreeing with me because they're scared to say it. And I try so much to urge people to speak their minds and to speak clearly or freely, without any judgment, because I don't care for you to all sit and tell me I'm wrong, but you can tell that people just won't do it because you're the boss. And I'm trying to constantly figure out how to stop that, you know, and how to create a culture of free idea flow. Sure, I'll still make the decision at the end of the day, but I want to hear everyone's opinion, you know?
Yeah. You could do something like a hackathon or something where you get everyone together and they come up with an idea to solve a problem in the business or add something and get 24 hours and put things together. I mean, I think, you know, or you have a big event, you can do a triage and have people on a Post-it note put, you know, 1 or 2 things they think that everyone could have done better and have them write it down so then they don't know what you're thinking or saying. And then put it up and then talk and then start with the most junior person in the room and go around. So there's no, you know, get rid of the confirmation bias. You have to institute a lot more things and controls and things and processes in order to set that up. And that also comes down to setting up more psychological safety inside of the group too, where they feel like they can do that. And that's usually a telltale sign is when you're feeling it, so are they. And then you got to do something to try to change that because otherwise it'll just keep going the same way because you can't think it and make it different. So you know that, right? I mean,
of course. It's just a struggle. I see it. Like I try so hard to set that standard and to make that sort of the culture here, but you just notice that it's difficult. I mean, there's some things that people that work here will say or do, and they're like, oh, yeah, but you're my boss, so I can't say that. And I'm like, what? I don't even act that way. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not even that type of leader, you know? And I hate, because I think that that is nothing but a flaw. I think it does nothing but hurt your company for people to feel like they can't freely say that they agree or disagree with something. Whether you choose to go one way or another, like I said, is up to you. But you should be able to say it. You should be able to hear people's real opinions at all times. But people just don't always act that way.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to make sure that we talk about this card game.
Yeah.
And you have it. And I'm excited to like sort of answer some questions. So tell me where the idea for this card game came from.
You know, I wanted to find a way to help people build great businesses like Google and all the top companies you read on Forbes list without spending a dime. I thought to myself, there has to be a way, right? Like every, you know, great entrepreneur thinks at some point, right? There just has to be a way, right? The answer has to sit out there and it's lying somewhere. I just don't have enough of the data or research and I'm not connecting the dots. So I just need to immerse myself in this and try to figure this out, right? And, you know, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just do a TEDx speech and I'll try this thing and we'll just, you know, I'll just dive in and do research. Before I come up with any premise, I'm just going to go find some things and just brainstorm. So I took like 3 months and just read stuff and nothing really hit me. And then I came across this research study by its professor, Arthur Aaron. And back in 1997, you know, pre-social media, he was trying to find out how to make fast friends with people and build deep relationships like snapping your fingers. And he played this question game and he got grad students and there were 54 grad students and they didn't know each other, complete strangers. And over the course of 45 minutes, they asked each other 36 questions and they became more revealing as they were going through it. Well, they measured it at the end and 30% of the people rated the relationship they just created with a complete stranger as the closest relationship in their life.
That's insane.
And one of the people that were doing it in the original study got married and invited everyone to the wedding.
They got married to someone they met there.
Yeah. And it led to a New York Times article where a woman went to a bar and started asking these questions, and that's where it got more famous. But when I started to look at that article, I thought to myself, you know, when you read a research article like that, it's so dry, right? And I try to read on some stuff, but I had to put in my head, like, who are the people and businesses? And I'm like, the reason that is that when you get to know deep personal information about people, you care about them because you can relate to the experience, but also you relate in a deeper level to the emotion, right? Maybe it's an emotion of loss, right? It doesn't have to be the same loss, but if you've had a deep loss and can relate to them, you immediately have a really close bond. It's like, you know, I'm sure there are people that have gone out and met someone in 5 minutes and felt like they've known them their whole life. Right? Everyone's had that experience sometime or another, right? Well, why can't you do that all the time?
Yeah.
The issue is you're not asking the right questions to get to that point, right? And we don't ask each other deep personal questions.
Why not? Too invasive, too vulnerable?
It's too invasive, and also it's just kind of weird too, right? you get real, like, if all of a sudden, you know, I walked in the door and I said, hey, Chris, you know, tell me about, if you had 1 year of your life to do over, which one would it be? You'd be like, yeah, get out of here. Like, this interview's over.
Oh, man, I love it. I'm just, you're right. But I'm the type of person, I'd be like, what? Well, shit, I guess.
Yeah.
It's 17.
But most people, they get this thought in their head, like, because our brains are wired for survival. They're not wired for happiness. So the brain initially says, why is that person asking me? Why are they judging me, right? And then you get entrenched and you just stop asking deep questions, right?
Yep.
And I mean, even on the question level, I gave this game to some people who had been married for 20 some years and had been best friends. And because I had some friends say to me, well, if you know someone for a while, like, what's this game going to do for them?
Yeah.
Every person I gave it to said it changed their relationship because they learned information they never known about that person.
Yeah.
Because they never thought of asking those questions, right?
Can I ask you this? Is there a way, or like, do you do this? Like, is there a way to apply that lesson learned to day-to-day life? Like, do you find yourself asking people deeper questions, or is it just too weird? Or like, can you do it outside of the game? You see what I'm saying? Like, how can you?
I think you have to just be much more inquisitive and start asking more questions of people and trying to get down to who they are and their experiences of things. And then I think you can draw them out. I've just naturally done that a lot. And I think women do that a lot better than men do that in general.
Yeah.
But I think you just have to do that with people and stop keeping things at a surface level, because the meat and all the marrow of life is down deep, right? That's where the magic happens. And the problem, if you don't do that, it just takes you way longer, right? I mean,
and I guess if you're talking to married couples who haven't done it, sometimes people just never do
it. Most never do it. I mean, if you look through the questions here, right, and you go give them to every single person that you've known well, you probably look at this and saying, I barely ever even touched the surface of any of these things with all the people combined, let alone one, right? And it's just human nature because we just don't do these things. But it is what builds great relationships outside of work. And if you do that inside of work, right, now that's where the magic happens for people too, right? Because, you know, end of the day, the other question I started asking people, you know, that I was coaching was going to people that they were managing. And I was just curious to know, why were people up at 3 in the morning and working really hard? And I asked a bunch of questions and no light bulb went on. And all of a sudden, like, something hit me, not in an interview, was that, like, none of these people are talking about their own success. They're more worried about pleasing the other person. So I started to put it together and I went back to some of the people, and they didn't want to disappoint the person that was their leader or they were reporting into, because that person they knew cared about them. And that disappointment was much more of a motivation end of the day than anything else, because the thought of disappointing them was more painful than lack of success or anything else. And I bet if we went around here and talked to people who've been working here for a while, I'm almost positive that every single person would give me the same answer too. I know it's hard for you to see it in your position, but
I know. But how do you solve that?
I don't think. I think that.
How do you work on it?
Well, but I think that that's the magic, right? Because then they know you care.
Okay, so the way to sort of, the reaction to it is to double down on letting them know that you do actually care.
Yeah.
Not to,
And you got to, and the other thing about it is managing, you know, people's, and this happens all the time, managing people's personal lives. And it's something, you know, if you're a young entrepreneur and you've got a business, one of the biggest places where you're going to lose money and productivity is when people's personal lives go off the wheels and you don't try to help them, right? I always say the rule of my clients is that how much money that person is producing in revenue or some metric is how much that you should intervene and try to help them, right? If someone's going, like, I talked to a CTO in a company she was having really bad marital challenges, and this is a huge company. I asked her, like, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how present are you on a day-to-day basis? Instead of 6. You realize 6 of the person who's running all technology? See how much money that's costing? And I was like, how many people are intervening or asking questions? No one, right? So someone could have hired a divorce attorney, done everything, probably gotten her to at least an 8. Now you're getting 20% lift at least, 30%, whatever lift off of that. I mean, it's massive, right?
Yeah.
But you can't like put your head in the sand, and that's what it's pretty rare when you see senior level managers getting that involved in people, but the requirement today is because that's affecting your business, and people are not separating this stuff out. So this is the kind of stuff you need to do so you get much more ingrained and in tune with what's happening, and then people also come to you with it, and then you can then help them or figure out what to do, right? And it's way different if it's a CTO of a company, whether it's, an admin, right? But you have to know that that's your job. And if you think it's not, you've just lost a boatload of problems. I bet if I went around this office, like any other one, if I went at anyone, and we looked at people over the last, several years, and people were saying like, and they clocked a point when their personal lives weren't really well, I bet we can 100% link it to their productivity here. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't stop it, but what you can do, you can't just take someone who's a 6 and make them a 10, but that's not the point. You can bring them up, and that's going to make a significant lift in your bottom line.
Interesting. Okay, let me ask you this too. How do I play the game? If I were to play this game with my employees, let's say I took it, I said, I'm going to use this. How do I actually do it? Do I have everyone sit around and you sort of pass out the cards? Is that how it works? And everyone operates?
Well, pass it. You just put them in the middle, right? And I put 2 sets of cards for people because there are conversation starters, which are easier questions, right? And there are connection questions, which are much deeper ones. And I put them that way because some people, they may not want to dive in. But I encourage leaders, and I wrote in the instructions, like if you go with the connection question first, and you have to go first because you have to be vulnerable, because when you're vulnerable and lead, you're telling everyone else that it's safe to share. Right? Otherwise, it takes so long in this game because then someone eventually takes this, but it messes up the flow. Then what happens is just people go, right? And you give 2 minutes or less to answer the question. You don't need to get a diatribe about it. And you just go around the room and, it's up to, anywhere between, 4 to 15 people. If it's more, it doesn't work because it's too many people. But if you do them in separate groups and everyone knows they're doing it, you still get the lift because people ask each other, and then you just get a lot of the goodwill, and people know that it's all going on. It spreads, right? Like positivity. They've done studies on that. It just spreads around, and then that's where the magic starts to happen. You get to learn people, and I saw another study was that if someone had a best friend or good friend at work, they were 7 times more productive and 7 times more loyal, right? So you don't just one. You don't really need a lot, right? And then what happens too is in this game, what you'll find is people who dislike people, they'll at least move it to neutral, right? Because they may say, I still don't want to be your friend, but I like you because I respect that you had to go through that, or that moment is something I had to go through. So they'll relate better to each other. And what happens when people relate better to each other? They treat each other better. They communicate better, right? They collaborate. They practice better business skills. They're better leaders. They'll problem solve better. They'll be more invested in people's success, right? I mean, all that stuff, that's like taking training that you'd pay tens of thousands of dollars for and essentially free, because now you're getting people to start operating towards their peak performance, towards optimal levels, just because they get to know each other on a much deeper level and they care, right? And when you care about people, you want the best for them. And that's just human nature, right? You look at trust. The most important factor of trust is caring, right? If people know you care about it, if they're unreliable, if they're not sincere, people let that stuff go. But if they know they care, like, they will never let that go. Right? And then you look at Google, like, they looked at their top 180 teams, right? And they were trying to find any pattern that they could. They had all the best researchers from all the Ivy League schools to come in and look at all the data, because they were like, we're going to build the perfect team. And over 3 years and millions of dollars, they finally found out, because someone was sitting in a group where the group manager said that they had like stage 4 cancer. and they saw the group productivity go up, and they realized it was psychological safety. It's the only factor was across all the groups. So much so with that Project X that they had, they spent $1 billion a year trying to make pond water into fuel.
Yeah.
The first thing they do is psychological training, safety training with every single person before they do anything else, because they're like, we have to do this. And
Which is essentially like this.
I don't know if it's like this, but they do other things, right, to build that in. This is just an easier way to do it.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around psychological safety. Does that mean you feel safe to be vulnerable with your team?
Yeah, and what it means is that you know people on a deeper personal level.
Yeah.
You're able to raise controversial ideas and it be okay, and you're able to ask questions without thinking like you're a fool.
Yeah.
Right? And the key thing there is when you're doing, people talk about creativity and doing brainstorming. I'm like, unless you have psychological safety, like why would you do a brainstorming episode? Because the people in the room, you're not getting the most out of them.
Yeah.
You got to create this. And all it takes is just going around a room and playing it. And even if you're in a big company, just getting everyone to do this and spend time, or you can be an executive. You take these cards, and I've had people go out to lunch with people and just play it with them one-on-one, right? And do other things. I mean, it just starts a conversation where you get to know that, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
where do I get these? If I'm listening and I want to,
you just go cardsagainstmundanity.com. Just download it, and it's just it's
you
like
just
cards.
Download it and print them.
Yeah,
So
I just
cool.
print it and cut them off, right? I mean, it's just it's free, and
You do it for free.
Yeah, I just did because I was like, I want people to have access to something that they can just use, and it can make a big difference. You could use these with friends too and family. I'm just, I've had people use it with high school sports teams and do other stuff, right? It's a galvanizing way to get people together quickly and bond, and this deep research behind it, and it just makes a lot of sense. And when you talk a lot of HR people and they're spending all this money on training and onboarding, I'm like, no one cares about the end of the day. Like, no client of mine is sitting there saying, boy, HR did this for me, therefore now I'm more loyal to the company 2-3 years in. I mean, sure, could you do the process better? Yes. But what they're thinking about in their head is, who cares about me here? Am I getting compensated appropriately? And if I leave, what's the cost to me, both personally and professionally? Now, they may not be saying personally and professionally, but they're thinking it. Right?
Yeah. Okay, let's play a couple.
Okay.
Where should I start?
You can take any card. We'll start with really.
Okay, so I grabbed this.
Yeah.
And then I'm asking you?
No, you answer it.
Okay, what characteristic do you most admire in others? Do you have it in yourself, or do you have it yourself? I most admire, this is what I'll say. I most admire when people are able to sort of socially, like walk into a room and sort of command everyone's, I almost want to say like affection. And I mean that in the sense of like, you just walk in and you just seem likable. You just seem like you want the best. You have the best intentions. You seem like you just want to be friendly. You know what I mean? That's what I admire the most. And I think that I admire it the most because I actually don't think that I have it. I think that I work on it. And I think that sometimes I get it right, but a lot of times I don't.
Yeah, I'd answer vulnerability. When I can see a leader walk in front of a group of people and not have the answers and have the courage to do that, I think that's pretty magical, because there's not many people that are able to deliver bad news or, say things that aren't necessarily rosy, or give people a wake-up call and give it with crystal clarity and feel it and know that there is emotion, that they care and are present in that moment, and it's not bawling people out or blaming people or being negative. And I think to myself, like, I've never had to deliver anything like that. And I'm always in the back of my head thinking, would I be able to, rise to the occasion to do something at that level with people? Because you don't see it that often, and you don't really have that many moments in your life where that is going to happen, and you don't have a do-over.
Yeah, so true. Okay, what's next?
Take one. You can just skip around. Just take middle.
We'll take a middle random.
Yeah.
Okay. Fill in the blank. If you really knew me, you'd know. I feel like I'm being kind of repetitive, but I think it kind of ties in. I think that if you really knew me, you'd know that in some social situations, I actually feel much more like intimidated or overwhelmed than people would think. Like I think a lot of people, sometimes also because I'm quiet or standoffish, people think that I'm an asshole or arrogant or whatever, but it's actually the opposite. Like I actually may be intimidated in those situations. But because of my history and my time on TV and I do this podcast and all this stuff, actually what's going on in my head is I feel sort of out of place or maybe like I don't belong there. But people see the opposite. How about you?
I would say that people think that I don't really have any walls and that I'll share a lot with other people. But I have that you go really far and then there's that big wall that starts to come up and it's really hard for me to get through that point, right? Because that's like the tender underbelly of talking about, you know, my parents and really having those lack of relationships in my own life. And to me, that's really scary because then it brings me back to those moments. I've just gotten really good at letting people in super far more than they normally would get from other people. Yeah. So they think that that's the case. They just don't see the wall because I pushed it back so far that they don't really know it's there, but it's there as big as anyone else's.
Yeah. That's good. I already feel more connected. I already feel like we're closer friends.
Yes.
Yeah, I trust you. Okay, last one. Is there anything you consider absolutely unforgivable? Like anything at all in life? Oh, man. I keep coming up with answers, and then I kind of have like a rebuttal. Like this is me trying to be Oprah. I don't know. When I think of the worst thing, okay, definitely 100%. It can be anything. This can be anything in life that's absolutely unforgivable. I would say that like hurting, especially sexually abusing a child, is unforgivable. Because in my head I went to murder, right? But my Oprah answer was sort of like, you know, understanding the different nuances of why something like that can happen. Hate crimes. A lot of times the person committing it is much more tortured than the damage that they're doing. You know, it's way deeper. But I think that sort of abuse of a child is just unforgivable, in my opinion. How about you?
You know, I would go to that place, and then the other part of me is saying when you hold on that hate, you allow that other people or person to control you. Yeah. And you ultimately have to let it go, right? Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, in Oprah, when you mentioned that, I mean, look at that. She's a prime example of all of that, right? Yeah. I mean, you can't get to the next place if you have all of this hate and anger because it's just controlling you moving forward, right? Mm-hmm. And now, you know, it'll take the time it takes for you to move beyond that, and that's okay. But eventually, you have to, otherwise it will define you because it will harden you, and that will be who you are. Is that pain will lead everything, and anyone coming in your life is going to have to get through that. Yeah. And do you really want to have that be the thing that holds you distance with other people, right? And even the most horrific things. I mean, and obviously all the things that you mentioned right there are absolutely horrible, right? And anything happen and painful, it's just you have to, when I think longer term, like there has to be an end point because otherwise they win and you lose.
Yeah, man. It's so true. It's like one of those things that like when you really go down the mental path, there is no end. There's no positive end to holding on to any sort of anger. But man, it's Oprah level expert, you know, to be able to let things like that go, you know?
And it takes time. And I think you have to reach breaking points. I mean, there's a lot that you have to do in order to get to that point, right? I can't imagine what it would be like for someone to have to go through and do that. Yeah. But if you look at infinity and their whole life being that, I wouldn't want them to ultimately be the victim forever in that situation because then they are.
Yeah. That's so true. I've been very fortunate that I haven't had to deal with like mega tragedy like that in my life or anyone like my family growing up, really anything like that. But I've met a lot of people who have, and I just see the effect it has on people's lives. And there are some things that can happen to a person, even not as severe as what I said, but that just changes, like you said, changes the course of their entire life.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen more people in the last year on Facebook, commit suicide, and people with family and kids. And you think like those people, what they have to go through at that point to get to the other side, you know? I mean, it's pretty tragic, but even then they're going to have to learn how to let it all go. Otherwise it's going to be that's going to be their story.
Yeah. It's nuts. Okay. Well, I get it. I definitely want to try the game with the team here. Cause I get it. I feel real open.
Yeah. And other people will too. And it's not, you'll learn stuff about them and they'll learn things about each other. And, the key thing too is if they can find another go-to person or maybe start changing their perspective about people and thinking, well, I really don't know everyone here. That can also change how they interact with people. Yeah. I mean, all these little subtle shifts go on when you start to, we've all met people and we thought we've known them, and then we've learned some information and we're like, wow, I really didn't know them, or I didn't really understand that. And you learn something and then you've softened. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Whatever it might be.
That's true. Almost every time. I've learned that almost every time in my life when I've been forced to know someone on that deeper level, or what their intentions were, or how they saw what they were doing that you thought was so offensive, almost every single time it leads to a stronger connection or empathy or something. You know what I'm saying? People hardly ever wake up in the morning and set out of their front door to just mess with people. You know what I mean? Like, or to rub people the wrong way or to be an asshole. Like, it's because of their own issues that are causing these other things. And once you can see that level of a person, it just opens it up so much more.
Yeah. And you start seeing things. Like, it's kind of even like cultural diversity. When I was my first year in Indiana, I had a roommate, and I was the only person on my floor that had a black roommate. And we did some stuff together, and he'd invite me out to stuff, and I'd be like the only, white person among everyone else. Yeah. And the first time I thought about it a little bit, but after a while, I never even thought about it another time, right? I mean, I'd be in a room full of people where they invite me out to some party, and I'm gonna be like the only person or one of the only people that I would never even think about it until someone else one time asked me about something and then brought that up. And I had to pause and think about it because it wasn't even in my mindset, right? Yeah. You just learn that people are people. It doesn't really matter. Yeah. But other people don't, because they see the difference because they're really far apart. Yeah. Right? But when you bring people together, you realize everyone's just another person struggling and trying to do the best that they can with the life that they have. And, we're all in the boat together, so we might as well try to help each other. Yeah.
And you mentioned I didn't go into it, but the isolation issue and the suicide issues that it's causing, and I guess, how serious is that? How much is it growing? And how do you start to chip away at it? Even if you're a listener and you're like, well, wait a minute, am I kind of being isolated? Am I like...
It's feeling lonely. It's not being alone.
Got it. So right. So how do you... that's interesting. Because you could not necessarily be alone, but feel lonely.
Yes. That's why I have to do stuff like this. You have to get support. You've got to be able to share, organizations. Like, you need to get people in these situations that they don't even realize, right? So a game like this is great because it does all these performance issues, brings people together, but they don't know it because they're playing a game, right? Yeah. Like, we're like a kid, right? Well, what happens there is you're doing all this work, and basically then you take loneliness out of the picture because you're creating connection inside of the group. But the problem is when you don't, is that, people have, they linked it to now proof that it's loneliness is the same as food, shelter, and water, right? I mean,
it's literally that important.
That important. And every day that you feel lonely is like smoking 15 cigarettes. Yeah. I mean, it's going to kill you. It's a big, the last Surgeon General, thought, and I believe it's true. It's like, it's the #1 health hazard for people today is disconnection because of social media and feeling like we have people around when we really don't, and just, when you go out, like, in 1950, you were forced to go out and meet people in order to have a friend. Yeah. Well, you had to build your social communication and emotional skill sets because that's the only way you got to meet someone, just walking in full of strangers, right? But now you don't. So those skill sets are an all-time low, right? And those exacerbate being lonely because then you don't know how to get yourself out of the problem that you're in. And it cycles worse and worse and worse, right? And it becomes a workplace performance. And if you're a 20-some-year-old person starting a business, you got to make sure everyone's connected and together and working and not feeling isolated, because otherwise, I mean, you're killing your own business.
That's so important. Because you know the other thing that's scary about it that I worry about young people is like, if you smoke 15 cigarettes a day, you saw yourself physically smoke them, you feel the cough, you smell like cigarettes, whatever. You eat bad food, you start to get fat, whatever. You notice physical things. Loneliness, especially if it's as tricky as being able to be around people and still feel lonely, is this sort of imaginary thing. And I think that young people are spending a lot of time on social media and you don't think that you're lonely because you're seeing people and you're watching stories and, oh my God, so-and-so's out tonight and this and that. And you don't even realize what you're doing to yourself. And I think that that's the interesting thing about it, and such the kind of scary, dangerous thing about it is you have to really sit and audit yourself and be like, wait a minute, is this something that I could potentially be suffering from? You know what I mean? Like, is this something I'm doing wrong? And make corrections and explore and experiment without the physical proof that it's happening.
Because you won't get it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem. And the people who are extroverts can go through, like anyone can, right? I mean, it depends on how you feel about yourself and what's going on.
Yeah.
And eventually, everyone's going to go through phases where they feel like this too, right? Because they're going to get entrenched. They're going to have a lot of stress. I mean, that's life, right? You just can't have it control you moving forward in your life every single day. And you've got to find ways to get support, to talk to people, and do things and force yourself outside your comfort zone. Because once you're lonely and feel like it, it's easier and easier to keep in that place. And it's harder and harder to take a step forward because you don't know how. And like you said, you don't even know what. And then it just is like, it's hard to give it a voice, right? And like, who do you tell and what's going on? And, that's why, like, I think as friends and stuff like that, like, we've got to step over the edges sometimes, and we have to intrude and we have to do things because, it's too late, right? I mean, I saw on Facebook this year, I counted, and there was like 12 people that I knew. Not knew. They're more associates. I mean, like, I barely knew. That committed suicide, and most I've ever seen, right? And all the people had families, and all the people had kids, and all the people you'd think were successful, right? And that's just not the case, right? And I think that's the problem. We're living in this whole ESPN highlight reel and Facebook news feed, and it's not real, and it's not sustainable for anyone. And we've got to step in and help people as friends and other people, and not let them, languish, or let them, if we see them withdrawing, there's a reason. If you have a friend that you're going out with, every week or every 2 weeks, and it starts to be every month, you've got to ask yourself, is that really because they're busy? Or is it because they could be lonely? And with a 40% chance of being lonely, it's better to step over the edge and do something, because that's can cause people some serious mental health and other issues, right? And you don't know. And it's, I'd rather be safe than sorry later on.
It's so interesting. Okay, here's a big thing too that I just wonder is like, because I'm so fascinated because of being in my position, and I think that a lot of my listeners are either in a similar position as me, meaning owning a business roughly my age, or younger but have goals and are just starting. Really fascinated by this idea of it being of sort of your work life and your ability to achieve and have a clear mind and do all these things is so connected to your internal battles, right? Is there any sort of, like, if you could take all the coaching that you've done of these already high level people and having to almost fix them, for lack of a better word, is there any starting like diagnosis or starting exercise that you could give a young person and say, hey, maybe just take a look at these things or do these exercises or make sure that these things are kind of clear and in order first before you go down that path? Is that?
Yeah, I think it's to start with some behavior that you'd want to change, right? That's the first thing, is saying, okay, what do I want to do, right? Then the next question I ask I'd ask myself is, what's the external story I'm making up about that of why that I can't fix that, right? So maybe if it's a New Year's resolution, I want to lose weight, just because it's a simple one, right? That you don't want to lose weight because you can't do it because no one's supporting you, right? You know, your family won't give you time to go to the gym, is all, whatever story it is stopping you, right? What happens is you've got to understand that story because that's controlling the behavior. And if you,
how do you find that story? Because you're the one telling it.
Well, you just got to start asking yourself. It doesn't really even have to be the number one. It just has to be some stories that you're making up, because it starts the process of digging. You can't really do this by yourself, because the problem is the human mind keeps us from seeing all this out of fear, right? Because otherwise we'd be overwhelmed and we'd literally just jump off a building because we couldn't handle it all, right? That's why it's so easy for you to go in a room and see someone else's problem, but you can't see your own. Our brain is set up like this, right?
Weird.
So then when you start the story, the next thing is you ask yourself, okay, what negative emotions am I feeling when I'm going through this? And you just got to start writing it down, and there's no real or wrong answer. But you start drawing a picture. I've got some stories that are top of mind. I have some emotions that I'm feeling, right? Then you start to ask yourself, okay, well, what internal self-limiting beliefs do I have about that, right? And usually that's like, I'm not enough of something, right? I'm not smart enough. Or it's the imposter one. Who do I think I am? Who do I think that I am that I can build this business, right? Like, because I feel like I'm not enough or not smart enough. Well, let's start, right? And then then the last question is you'd ask yourself, when's the first time I felt like that? Because then you can start to see at least start to get the pattern of what's going on. And then you work back up the stack from when the first time you felt it is saying, okay, well, if I felt like I was good enough to start this business and I'm smart enough as in power, like, how would I, what would that make me feel, right? And then what limiting or beliefs would I have to support that, right, internally? Like, I am enough, right? I'm smart enough, right? And then what emotions would I have to have? I'd have to feel confident. I have to feel, passionate. I feel driven, right? And then what stories about the world, right? The world needs this. They want to support me. They want me to succeed. People want to join my business, right? And then you get to that behavior, and then you can start to create some change, right? And you can start to see and put that stuff together. But it's hard by yourself because there's always pieces that you end up missing, right? And I always think to myself, like, and I've even asked some mentors and other people about like doing our product. And I mean, I see stuff out there, but it's so hard to get yourself to do that, right? It's kind of like I saw this interview with David Goggins, and he's amazing, right? And he talked about drive versus motivation in an accountability mirror. And what he talked about is, you're not going to get out when it's 20 degrees below zero and run, right? If you have motivation, it's fleeting. You have it if you have drive, if you figure out, okay, I'm going to do this for a reason. Like, he's going to go do the adventure races to raise money for fallen soldiers' kids because they go to college, right? But the deeper question is, what am I lacking in my life that makes me want to do this, right? And that's the accountability mirror, right? So you got to get to that level. Like, what am I lacking that makes me want to do this? What am I lacking that makes me want to start that business, right? And be honest with yourself. I feel like I'm not enough. I feel like I have to prove to people. Well, when you start doing that, you start finding the answers, because then you get really honest and down deep of what's going on. And when you keep yourself at that level, you start finding more and more of the answers, and you can start digging into it. But it's hard, and people don't want to do that level of work because they're afraid of what they might uncover. And then they're afraid to share it. And they should share those things again with people they trust and care about, not with everyone, right? Because that's not vulnerability, that's having not boundaries, right? It's like on Facebook when people say, oh, well, I just got divorced and I have the worst husband, right? Like the worst husband, right? And that's not having boundaries. That's not vulnerability, right? That's having verbal diarrhea.
Yeah, it is.
Right?
And I hate it. It's common in like family Facebooks and like, you know what I mean? Like the old family members love to like vent on Facebook.
Yeah, and that's going to actually hurt you because that's not training and that's not getting the right information. It's not talking to people and getting the necessary support. That's getting fake support from people that don't exist, which leads to feeling lonely because a bunch of people on Facebook saying it's going to be okay. Well,
and you think you solved it.
Yeah.
You know, you think you're feeling better.
No one is, right? I mean, all this is not, it's not real.
Yeah.
Because belonging requires human connection face to face.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you can't get that over an electronic communication or over the phone talking to someone. You need it to be in person. It's like when people ask me the question, I say, when's the last time you built a best friend over the phone, right? Never, right? Even if you built a great relationship with someone on Skype, I've had people who've gotten together and met each other in person. I said, it crystallizes when you met face to face.
Yeah.
Maybe you did 99% of the work on Skype or the phone, but that 1% is the glue that made it all possible.
Yeah, yeah. It's so true. It's just so interesting. I feel like it's a lot of issues that I hear a lot and a lot of things. I wish there was like something you could create where like an 18-year-old could team up with a buddy and make that buddy their life coach, right? Because of some sort of set of rules that you implemented and taught them how to hold their friend accountable. Like I wish that existed. Because there is so much of it that I don't think is doable alone, and that accountability and that honesty.
You have to have that, right? And I think that's a requirement to get, you know, at what you need to do in your own life. And you just have to, I mean, and you have to realize that your level of self-awareness will never be greater than social awareness. And as you're a leader, right? No matter if you're a 20-some person building a business. Yeah. Like that is going to make or break the business because you have to execute a business that's only 3 people, might grow to 30 or 40. Yep. Well, now you have less control over the outcomes because you just have frontline leaders you're interacting with and the rest of the people you're not. Yeah. So if your blind spots are big, you're affecting the business in a negative way and can make a major impact on what goes on. Yeah. So you've got to be able to dig deep and do the work that's required on a consistent basis, and then have some check and balance that's, that's good. And a lot of people don't even have it with board of directors, right? They even pick the wrong board of directors and the wrong skills. And
or you learn to control the people around you. I've also noticed that. Like I think that you start to get some power, and all of a sudden you can control everyone around you, and you do that on purpose subconsciously, and you don't associate with equals that you can go to and get their opinion about yourself. You know what I'm saying? Your team ends up being a bunch of people, your friends or your everything ends up becoming a bunch of people sort of under you, as opposed to people that you can go have a drink with and say, hey man, here's what I'm dealing with. Does this seem okay? Yeah. Because that feels weak. It feels weak to go have a drink. Luckily for me, I've had pretty good like sort of mentors and older people. My cousin's older than me. I can go now because I don't have any work related to those people, and I can go say, hey, does this seem fishy to you? And I'll get their opinion. I haven't had much of that like pride issue, but I see it a lot. And I've seen myself almost do it. I've seen myself feel like having that instinct or going and doing that is a weak thing to do, and it makes me not smart enough to be running this business because the other leaders probably don't ask. You have those thoughts.
Yeah, that's why you need to get other people, right? I mean, like, you've had a bunch of guests in the show and other people. Like, something you could do is saying, hey, twice a year, you get together a handful of people and then make some short agenda, and someone brings in their biggest challenge, brings in, their highlight, their low light. Yeah. And, get
that's one thing that I thought about is like trying to do a hybrid between like the connection building and like the guests that I've had on the thing, and just say twice a year I invite everyone to this thing and we just sort of mess around, get to know each other, do some exercises,
And that works a lot for people. I mean, what that is that's like a effective mastermind, especially when you're doing, because you got to control the people in it and have the right people. And because a lot of the masterminds these days, it's caught on to be like a cutesy term, and people are charging a lot of money, and it's not really serving people, and it's not really helping them, right? Because a lot of this is just getting support. It's not necessarily doing something. It may be highlighting some stuff that you do outside of it, but that costs you a lot of capital and paying all this money to get together to do stuff for the most part. Yeah. There are other ways that you can orchestrate and do these things. Yep. Absolutely. But we all need it. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have some sort of accountability,
you're screwed.
You're screwed because that's everyone I talk to. Eventually, I mean, I was listening to this podcast of Michael Gervais, and he's a sports, psychologist, and called Finding Mastery, and I really like it. And, someone asked him a question on there about, how can you find a way so athletes can continue to do better all the time? Yeah. And he said, that's a holy grail. Yeah. He said, it's in the rock bottom moment that Michael Phelps got his last Olympics. If he didn't have what he had happened, he likely would not have reached the pinnacle that he did, right? Yeah. And I think that's the challenge in these rock bottom moments, right? And the problem is today is people have a rock bottom moment and they may get off it, but they never really solve it because they don't seek out any help, right? They just power through it, and they figured out how to do it before, and they just do the best they can, and then they just live like this, right?
I think it just chips away at you. You end up, at the end, you kind of end up, I feel like those type of people, is a little bit of a bold claim, but I feel like those type of people that insist on powering through and trying to fight life, it just gets slowly chipped away at. And the end of that story is usually not so great, and it's usually someone who's exhausted and kind of throws in the towel, right?
Yes.
As opposed to the guy who is constantly getting input, learning from experiences, building, growing. They usually end up kind of
way up, right? Because they're way more successful, but they're way more fulfilled, right? Because the journey, they've learned from the failure, they've taken in stride, they can look back on it, they've gotten support. Yeah. They've sought out other people. They know they don't have all the answers. They're willing to go back to the drawing board and do whatever work's necessary. Yeah. And they just keep kind of going up, right? They don't take these falling off into the precipice, which is almost everyone does, right? I mean, I see this with most executives, and the cost is so high. Like, when I'm in a business, right, one of the things I always can tell, I can go like 3, 2, 1 off the cliff, is that if you are like a COO of a company and the next step is being the CEO, right? Yeah. You're really focused on that. But if you get to that point and you don't know the next point, you wake up one day and saying, why did I want what I want? Because now I don't know what I need next. Yeah. You've got to constantly, once you're almost getting to the next hill, have the next thing to climb. Or at least say, now that I'm here, I know I need to figure this out, and it's okay that it's unclear, but I'm going to do things like go to conferences, set up stuff, right? Yeah. So I feel at least like I'm making progress, and I'm taking steps to figure out what that next point is. Yeah. Because if not, almost everyone gets to that point, right? Yeah. And I talked to successful venture capital. I talked to this guy, Wayne Chang, who's a really successful angel investor out in Boston, and he's like in his early 30s, and sold the company to Twitter and Google and all the rest of the stuff. And he said at one point he just woke up and he's like, what am I doing, right? Yeah. And you'd think, how could you ever think of it? Because unlimited success beyond that. Yeah. But he didn't know the next step wasn't just selling and making more money. Yeah. It had to be something beyond that. Yeah. And he reached the point where he got the money and the success. He didn't have the next thing set up. And what happened? You fall off the cliff. You do. Right? And I talked to him, it took him a year to do this. And like, it takes people a lot of time and all this money and pain and energy. So you have to monitor all this stuff. So it's a challenge, but you've got to start investing in yourself and have difficult conversations, not only with other people, but yourself consistently. Otherwise, you're going to be paying some heavy prices. And even if we're all going to have rock bottom moments, but what are you doing and what's your plan once you get there?
That's the only way out.
It's the only way out, right? Yeah. We all can sit there for a little while because, it's difficult when you're in that level of pain, but you then have to have a plan to get out of it. Yeah. And if you don't have a plan going in how you might get out of it, it's going to take you way longer to figure that out.
I mean, you're just going to sit until you do. That's it. Yes. Like, you're just going to sit there until you say, all right, tomorrow I'm doing the first thing. Like, I don't know. I see it a lot.
Yes.
Okay, let me ask you this final question, and then I'll let you get out of here because we're cranking. You have lived an incredible life already. You've learned a lot. You've worked with a lot of really successful people. You've watched people fail. You've watched people succeed. You've seen a lot of shit, and you've given a lot of advice. If you could go back to the high school version of yourself and tell yourself one little gem to sort of make it all a little easier, or take the edge off, maybe a lot that you wasted time worrying about, or a lot, those things, what would you tell that younger version of yourself?
I would give 3 pieces of advice. Yep. One would be to stay curious, because that is one of the most important qualities and most undervalued. Yep. I would say 2, you have to be vulnerable, because that's where true courage is found, and if you want to get to it. And I'd say the 3rd one, and I'll steal from Gerard, is do you. Yeah. Yeah. Because I spent a lot of time trying to please a lot of other people, because that's a lot what I had to do. Yep. And it really led me on a road that wasn't really helpful for a long time, until I sort of, Yeah. And even now I think, struggle with it, because I had to do it for so long. It's hard to unwind it when you've brainwashed yourself trillions of times in your head saying it.
And we're all brainwashed that way, I think. I think it's very, very few exceptions, rare exceptions of people that are programmed not to think that way. I think we're taught to impress teachers, coaches, friends, fit into circles, do this, do that.
Yes.
And that comes from like saying, okay, well, what is cool? What is pretty? What is smart? What is, you know what I'm saying? And you got to fit that. Another thing that I loved, I just wanted to say it because I just finished Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. And the one thing that she said in there that I loved was putting the value in being courageous, not in being right or the smartest or the best. So you go home at night saying, how courageous was I today? How many uncomfortable situations did I put myself in? How much did I force myself to grow? Not, was I the smartest in the room? Was I the best? Did I know it all? Because you're going to get the shit kicked out of you every time you judge something by that. But if you judge by courage, every day can be a win.
Yeah, she's brilliant. I mean, that's the author I give every client the books to. Yeah. She is the best business and leadership author out there, period. Everyone else, and I read a lot, and I think there's a lot of great material out there, but that material is priceless. You want to be an extraordinary leader of your time and whatever you do. You do what she does. It's almost impossible for you to not. Yeah. Because again, it's kind of like you take an average bunch of people together who are courageous. They will move mountains. You can take the most brilliant people and they won't. Mm-hmm. Right?
That's so true. I can't wait to read that book.
Yeah. Well, becoming.
What's the one you sent? What's it called?
It's Braving the Wilderness, her new book.
Got it.
It'll be coming here Wednesday.
You're so good at this. This is you being good at this. I need to get better at this. You know what else I would like you to send me if you have the time? Is send me a list of good books I should read for upping my social and gift giving and, getting better at that.
John Ruhlin was, I told you, one of them. His book, Giftology, is the best book out there. And many people call him like the Giftology, like God, or I made that up maybe, but it's something. I mean, it's a book it's riddled with great things that he did, and it's rooted in giving, right? Yeah. It's just giving gifts for people that are much more targeted of doing stuff that would mean, that would mean something to them. Mm-hmm. So you just have to, find out. Yeah, you've got to find out what those things are when you can, and then it's much more personal. And if you're doing a business setting, especially for sales and business development and stuff like this, it's really, because one of the guys, Wayne Chang, that I interviewed in a podcast I haven't released, we were. I looked on his Twitter, and the pin he has on the top is a commencement speech that he got because he never graduated from college. So what I did was I took his commencement speech, and I put it in like a frame that I gave him, like the whole thing, kind of put it out. And I just going to thank him for his time. And it's someone that I probably, just starting out a podcast, it was a home run that I hit that I even got him to do it. Yeah. And I gave a couple other people some really like interesting things that I did a lot of research, and sometimes you can't find stuff, right? Yeah. But when you can, they're really touched that you spend the time doing it, and they really, good. So that's the book. So I'll send you other stuff, but
done. Anything to tell people where to go? Are you launching the podcast soon?
Well, it's called The Executive Breakthroughs. There's like 10 episodes up already. It's had a bunch of it
on iTunes and everything.
On iTunes, and then you can go to JasonTreu, TREU.com and learn about coaching, whatever. And then the Cards Against Mundanity, that just redirect, and you can just download the game for free. And there's instructions on there, and I just put a new blog post up. I interviewed a lot of people about like the 5 best team building games and activities that I could that I saw, that I sort of put something together in my own head, and you know, there's a couple fun ones in there. Like one of them I found was get everyone in the group to do like an air guitar or lip sync, and then say why they got together and just organize people randomly and then play from anyone and just do something really fun.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Because it bonds a couple of the people together in a different way. Yep. And there's a reason they pick this, like, you know, and they share with everyone. And then people think about the story of maybe that song for them, right?
Yep.
And then that connects it on another level. And I found people doing it, right? I had another one that, and I've used this and it's worked exceptionally well. And you might want to use this at a staff meeting.
Yeah, please.
If you have everyone bring in a picture that means something to them, right?
Can
Whether
be
anything.
Yeah.
Give them 30 seconds to explain why they picked it and what it means to them and go around the room. It's crazy great.
It's amazing what even that'll do.
Oh, it will, because everyone now can relate to stuff, right? I've had clients do it, and everyone after a while starts to love the meeting just for that, right? And it changes the whole dynamic of going in. And I didn't even realize this, but the Surgeon General, he was in Harvard Business Review, actually did that for his staff, and it turned the entire meetings around and got way more productive. And when I read it, I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. Like, you do something and someone else smart does and don't even really realize it doing it. But those are type small little things to do really draw people out and find ways to connect and belong. And you don't need to find a lot of hooks. And then it makes your job as the owner of the business or as an executive in the business way easier. Because then people care more and they'll do a lot more because they can't have this business not be successful. Right? Like, then they'll do anything for it. And that's something that will make a fundamental difference if you're someone in your 20s or 30s or whatever. I mean, people that love working there because they love you and the people, because that sense of belonging is so great. And it's harder to lure people away. I mean, all this stuff, but, you know, and then we feel like, you know, that there's your purpose, right? Stop looking for the purpose. The purpose is every person around that room.
That's so good. All right, man, you killed it. Thank you so much for this. Thanks for all the advice. Thanks for everything. This was great.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Of course. We did it.
We did it.
There it is. All right, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, I didn't really know, obviously I didn't know Jason at all getting into that, and I'm relatively new on executive coaching and that sort of thing, but he did a really good job at sitting and not only telling his story, but walking me through some of the things that he does and how it works, and I was really excited about it. So, hope you gained a little bit of knowledge from that episode. I appreciate all of you guys. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you spreading the word. Please continue to share on social media. Tell your friends. Post me on your stories. Whatever you can. Every little bit helps. youngandreckless.com. If you use the promo code SSL, you get 40% off. Leave me some positive feedback. My newsletter is ynr.la/drama. And youtube.com/drama is where I put all my video content. Thank you guys. You're the best audience ever. I'll be back next week.
Guys, if you like that and you want to see more like it, as well as vlogs, other web series, and all the random stuff that I'm doing here on YouTube, don't forget to click that subscribe button. You won't regret it. I promise.